All right, welcome to the sixth episode of the BSLI podcast. Today's theme is going to be related to becoming a great leader. Today we have Dr. Horak and our former president Harrison. So let's start us off. Dr. Horak, tell us a little bit about yourself so people know who you are and what you do.
Okay, cool. I'm a 1965 model human, born in St. Louis, Missouri. My undergraduate is from Northwestern. My PhD and master's degrees are in high energy astrophysics from the University of Alabama in Huntsville, which I got while I was working at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. I spent 17 years in total at NASA, everything from a practicing research scientist to an executive. I was vice president for research at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, vice president for space systems at Teledyne Brown Engineering. And then in 2016, I got here as soon as I could, came to the Ohio State University to serve as the Neil Armstrong Chair in Aerospace Policy, which is both in the College of Engineering and in the John Glenn College of Public Affairs. And today I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Engineering as well. And I run the Center for Aviation Studies.
Fantastic, Dr. Horak. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and it's an honor. Harrison, you've been on the podcast before. How do you feel today?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's nice to be back on the air with everyone. I think we have a great discussion. I've been looking forward to it since we put it on the calendar.
Awesome. All right, so let's break this down. So our first topic that we're going to hit is what makes a good/great leader? And the first question is, what are some skills that a leader should have? And Harrison, since you were a former BSLI president, tell us what some skills that a president needs to be on BSLI.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I'll take it a few steps back. The first time I ever met you, Dr. Horak, actually, one of the books that I saw on your desk, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, this guy, whenever I even hear some advice from this guy, I know he's going to know what he's talking about. You had Lincoln on Leadership on your desk, and I had read it in the Leadership in the Classroom and found that there's a really strong tool, and it's a very easy read too. It's only maybe 100 pages or so, but there's a lot of really good pieces in there that Lincoln used while he was president, and I think that they're really fundamental for being a good leader. So certainly, when you're a leader, you have to realize that you are the culture setter, you're the trendsetter, and everyone looks to you, which means that image is important and not in a respect in like a modern sense of like image like on social media, but more of like the image that like you are really the number one point for what the culture is. So with that, that's the first point, is just being aware of how you carry yourself to the organization and realize that people are going to emulate that. So lead by example. If you want people to do things and do things in a certain way, do that yourself and set that example, and then other people will follow. And then the other second point I think that's really important for leadership is being able to listen to people and understand what's going on. And being that certainly means that you need to go out and talk to people and get their input and advice and try and really listen to people and figure out what's right and wrong. So yeah, just starting out, I think those are two huge things that are often overlooked when coming into a leadership role.
Dr. Horak, would you like to add anything off of that or branch into new ideas in the skill sets?
Yeah, so one of the things I teach a course on, it's called Public Affairs Course 2130, Leadership in the Public and Nonprofit Sector. We spent a whole semester on this question. And it is the kind of question for which there is really no answer at the back of the book. Everything Harrison said, I do agree with. If you're going to work to be a leader in any organization, it could be the leader of the Fifth Navy, Fifth Fleet. It could be the leader of a small nonprofit that works, just to help a particular local cause. I really think you got to know yourself, because leadership is not as much about the people around you as it is about you, and knowing what skills you have, what skills you don't have, and when the world needs you to be maybe the kind of leader that you're not innately, right? Sometimes leadership requires you to do things that aren't in your sweet spot. In fact, most of the time, probably, if you're a leader, not the things that you're being called to do and that the situations require may not actually play to your strengths. They may actually be in sort of their areas of weakness. And so being mindful of that, knowing who you are, what the situation is and what it calls for, And how that balances into your skill set and how you interact with the people around you is really, really a hard part of leadership. We saw, for example, an interesting leadership dynamic that's occurring with the USS Teddy Roosevelt, right? The captain of the Roosevelt was very worried about his crew with COVID-19. He exercised things that were within his power to do. We can have a long debate about whether he should have or shouldn't have. They were within his power to do, and he did them. He was summarily dismissed by the acting Secretary of the Navy, who then came and gave a fiery speech to the TR, the crew of the Teddy Roosevelt, which then got him fired. So you can see that each of these people were, I'll say, leading, right? They were doing their job as they understood it at the time. And it may very well have been the case that the kind of leadership that they went to innately, because that was their strength, rah-rah or consultative or, crew for whatever, may not have been what the situation called for. And so sometimes you got to slow down or at least enter every leadership situation with an understanding of who you are, what your preferences for leading are, and whether the situations and the people around you call for that or not. Besides that, I think you need to be likable, not always liked, but at least have the ability to be liked. You definitely need to be trustworthy. And you have to have some competence in your area, right? I don't think I'm going to go lead a financial services organization, not because I'm not likable enough or trustworthy enough. I just don't know anything about the subject matter. But it's important to realize that that third piece is something you can grow much more easily than you can grow your likability and your trustworthiness. So maybe I'll stop there and you can ask a few more questions.
All right, I want to add a couple of my tips on some skills that I think when you're looking at a leader, it's like their work ethic. Like, are they willing to go the extra mile and put in the extra time and day in and day out? Are they willing to work with the weakest link in the organization to bring them up to speed so they can be more efficient in the organization, to the point where the leader knows their strengths and weaknesses and how to make sure that their weaknesses are being filled by people who have the strengths that the leader does not have in that sense. And it's like knowing, I think, all the assets and like knowing like your pool of applications or team members, and knowing that, I think that gives a leader an upper hand. Also, some factors is like also like writing and public speaking is another factor, and how to get morale high when low things go down. So like after like the Challenger explosion, how do people bounce back from that? Is like, how do we continue to, work on the space shuttle? How do we improve it so that disaster doesn't happen again? And that can be seen throughout history through different events, even looking at sporting events. Like after you had a big loss, how do you bounce back and recover? It's just that, as that being a leader, I think those are some key traits that a leader needs to look at before they step into that position.
Yeah, communication, Trevor, you mentioned that. That's incredibly important. Not just your formal communication, but positions of leadership require, and in fact, it's innate to the position, that the person who occupies that position is communicating all the time, whether they know it or not, whether they intend to be communicating or not. If you are silent as a leader, you're communicating something to people in your who are in the bucket of stewardship that you're responsible for. So yes, public speaking is very important. The ability to write coherently is important. To be clear in your communication, timely, direct, accurate, all of that, and even in the spaces between your words, you're communicating. And so you need to be really mindful of that, because people, we all naturally look to leadership positions for information, and we expect that information to be coming. And sometimes we even, if there is no information coming, followers or teammates or members of your community will fill that space with whatever they think should go in there, good, bad, or indifferent, usually bad. So you're always communicating.
Because I remember in the communication and Dr. Morrison's communications class, you came in and talked about all the different pathways where communications could be broken down and things get lost. So like having that open communication is very crucial for leadership positions.
Big time. And sometimes, you may say, well, I know, but I can't say. And you know what? If you say that, people will accept that if it's the truth, right? Because they understand that information, not all information flows all freely all the time, right? And maybe in the BSLI you don't have these kinds of situations, but certainly in larger organizations where you have, legal liability, or you have to be aligned with policy, or that certain decisions have to get staged in a certain order. So, for example, at Ohio State, right, the president of the university is not going to get out ahead of the governor. That's just the fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it may be that the president knows of the university, and the leadership of the university knows what the governor is going to do, but can't say what the governor is going to do because they've been briefed on it, and so that we can get Ohio State ducks in a row and then go forward. And you may just be able to say, look, I know, you will know, but I can't share that information right now. And you know what? That's authentic. It shows a high degree of integrity, some trust in the people around you, as well as you're asking their trust. And people can take that. People can accept that, rather than just saying nothing. It's usually a bad idea to just say nothing.
I think also, to add on to that, I think is saying a leader doesn't know, I think is crucial to say, just in case it's like, oh, you keep saying or filling in fluff and being like saying, oh, I know this, I know that, and you can't really explain it. That kind of hurts your credibility, and people don't end up trusting you, which affects your trustworthiness. So saying that you don't know and get back to them and research it and come back is more effective as a leader in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that touches on something that we talk about in class. Back in the 13th century, there was a gentleman in England named Roger Bacon, and he wrote down something called the 4 stumbling blocks to truth. And I use this in leadership because there are places where you can really make a mistake. One is the concealment of ignorance through ostentation of seeming wisdom, right? So it's like, well, I don't really know, but I'm not going to let my team know that I don't know, and I'm the leader, and so I can say stuff, right? And it will sound great because, well, who am I to question the leader? Don't do that. The best person I ever saw it as was Mike Griffin. He was the NASA administrator. Mike is one of the smartest people I've ever met. He has 5 advanced degrees. I mean, he was the first engineer to hit a missile with a missile in SDI. He ran the space agency, and he was never afraid to say, I don't know, right? You could ask Mike a technical question, and if Mike buffaloed his way through, you'd probably believe him because he has 5 advanced degrees. He's the smartest guy on the planet, but he never, ever went there. He would say, I don't know, or here's what I think, but let's go prove it out, right? So concealment of ignorance through ostentation of seeming wisdom. Custom, right? It's a trap, can be a trap. If your answer from your leader is, we do it this way because that's the way we've always done it, that can be a red flashing light that people are not aware that the context has changed. And when the context changes, you need to change your mode of behavior. Number 3, the imperfection of undisciplined senses, not knowing what to pay attention to and not training yourself to pay attention to the right things as a leader. I think we had some of that in Challenger and in Columbia, not paying attention to the right things. In both of those cases, for example, the hardware was talking to us. What do I mean by that? Challenger, the O-rings on the shuttle solid rocket boosters, we had seen blow by before. We had seen singeing of the rings. The hardware was like, and we had not picked up the signal, not trained ourselves to listen to it and pay attention to it. And then on Columbia, we had foam coming off the tank all the time on the shuttle. We had foam coming off the tank after Columbia. I remember the bipod ramp come flying off on return to flight. And I thought, oh my gosh, of course it just went on by. But to hear things in briefings like, oh, it couldn't be that. It's like a styrofoam cooler coming out of the back of a pickup truck on the highway and hitting your windshield. How much damage could that do? I'm paraphrasing what I heard, what I remember the shuttle program manager saying on live television. I thought, that's just not right. We're not paying attention to the right things. And then the last is the influence of fragile or unworthy authority. And as Harrison, you said, you got to walk the walk, right? You said the same thing, Trevor. When you lose your worthiness or your leadership is fragile, then you're in deep trouble. So those are the 4 things I try to keep in mind with our course. And sometimes success is just the avoidance of failure, right? Just how did somebody live to be age 100? Well, I got up every day and I didn't die on that day. And if you do that, it's like, wow, okay, good. Sometimes as a leader, that's all you're being asked to do, is to steward your organization in a way that you avoid failure, thereby ensuring success.
Harrison, would you like to add anything else before we transition to the next question?
I think going back to one of the comments about in an organization when someone new is saying, well, why do we do this way or that way? And you said, well, that's the way we've always done it. I have seen that on BSLI before, and I think in our organization it might be a little less because of ignorance, and it's maybe more, I think for us, just the fact that we're all undergraduate students, so we have max 4 or 5 years in this program. So there's when it comes to our program, there's a lot to learn in a really short period of time, and there's a lot of natural turnover. So I think we've had some things bubble up in our organization like that, and they have caused problems. I know when I was a project manager, we had some issues with the launch buttons, and that was simply because I had only seen done that way, and I didn't really understand why things had been done, and that did cause issues down the line. So maybe I was curious if you had any thoughts for maybe an organization, for student organizations that have really high turnover. What are some practical steps that could be taken to avoid just customary transfer of knowledge?
Yeah, so especially when reliability, safety, repeatability, high consequences for failure, all of those things occur in rocket launches, right? You have a high consequence of failure. You need to be reliable. You need to be safe. You need to understand what you're doing. Well-documented processes, well-documented procedures, and the propagation of those well-documented processes and procedures, along with why we do it that way. Okay. Custom isn't, saying eschew custom is not an invitation to blow everything up every time you do something and start over. We don't want that, because you'll never be successful. And so sharing with new members of BSLI, for example, okay, here is our safety procedure when we test fire our motors. And here's why we do it this way, because the consequences of not doing it this way are prices we don't want to pay, right? That documentation, that explanation, and sort of placing those in concrete then gives you this chance for people to learn more quickly, right? They can study the procedure at home. You can hand it to them. You can say, here's how we did it last year. Here's how we're going to do it this year. See how this all works. I think some of that is very important. And it's also incumbent on people in the organization to realize that things are the way they are for a reason. We can argue about what the reasons are. And sometimes the reasons are not justification for keeping them the same way, but other times they are, right? I mean, can you imagine if we just said, well, traffic lights are just such an imposition on personal liberty. I think we ought to get rid of them. Why? Well, because they make me stop when I don't really feel like I should be told to stop. Like, come on, right? That's crazy in my view, right? Because it would cause chaos. So red means stop. Green means go. That's our custom. I'm not suggesting that we overthrow that custom and all decide what we think the color light means when we happen to feel like it should go. So there's some real good reasons why you should have that. But it doesn't always justify, women in the right to vote, right? In the early part of the 20th century. Like, well, why can't women vote? Well, they never have had a right to vote. Why should they, right? That's a crazy argument. That's crazy. That's a situation where custom was holding people back, not really protecting, was protecting a particular interest, but it wasn't protecting the overall interest and well-being of our society. It was protecting the interests of few, not the many. So you got that argument, but fortunately, it didn't hold, and in this case, women were given the right to vote as they deserve.
Right.
As everyone,
right.
In fact.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, those are both some really great examples, and I think just tying it back a little bit back into BSLI, one of the most practical examples I see of custom is just the fact that we will take our designs from previous years and iterate over them, and project managers like to focus on improving certain aspects, but then over time, just as generations of students continue to go through, there's certain aspects that may not have been looked at in several years. So then once those people leave, who originally worked on some aspect, maybe it's a certain way we attach the fins of the rocket, that knowledge is lost. So
right.
Just wanted to give an example for listeners.
Right. Yeah. In any engineering design, any of us can imagine something that would be better, right? We could do it this way. We could do it that way. But that trade-off has to be made against cost, schedule, likelihood of success, risk, and these other things. And so really in a leadership position with the leader and the team, it's to come to some kind of a decision around that about what things should we change, what things should we not touch, to try to maximize the probability not only of completing the set of requirements that we have, but also exceeding them in ways of performance or schedule or whatever that parameters you might like to throw at it.
All right, so we can transition a little bit into how do you know when you have a great leader on your hands? Like that moment, be like, this is the person that we can rely on and go to. Does it take over a few years, or does it take like an experience that say this person has potential?
Sometimes you will never know whether you have a great leader in your midst because the situation may not call for it. Harrison, you mentioned Lincoln. Imagine without the Civil War, would we have known what kind of president Lincoln would be? I don't know. I mean, he might not have been that great. You might have never known. There are probably 1,000 Abraham Lincolns within 10 miles of me, right? But they may never be placed in the context where that leadership is needed or can show up or what have you, right? It's easier to know when you have a crappy leader. That's pretty obvious. That is very obvious. And sometimes a matter of taste or choice, but it's a very hard question you ask, actually, because the more you think about it, you have to realize that leadership is something that there's a piece of it that's innate, there's a piece of it that's learned, and there's a piece of it that is entirely dependent on the context. So someone says to me, how do you know if you have a drought tolerant lawn? Well, I don't know. I have to go through a drought. And sometimes you have normal rainfall, and so you never know whether your lawn's drought tolerant or not. It's just green, right? Because the things that the leader's being called to do or could respond to, they're not being, the situation's not calling for that, which is also why you should never make too quick judgments about who is and who is not a capable leader, because their strengths may not be called upon at the moment. They may have them, they may be latent, but the environment or the situation may not call on them to be expressed. And so their leadership is there. It's just not, it's sort of genetic, not epigenetic, right? It doesn't express itself because the environment hasn't asked for that to be called out.
Yeah. Harrison, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, to jump onto that point, maybe for some of the students listening, or maybe if you're younger at the starting out and maybe you've never had a leadership position before, and it sounds oftentimes like people are like born to be leaders. Certainly in my experience, that's something that's completely not true at all. It's something that I've seen. There's so much, all these books and lectures and everything on leadership. I think truly one of the best ways is once you understand and just some of the basic principles, and maybe after you listen to this podcast, one of the best ways is to be able to get out and practice it. I know that, for example, one of the I was saying earlier about getting out and really listening to people. That was something that when I was in high school and I was leading a club, that was one of the things I didn't do, and a lot of people were really upset. And because I never really asked anyone and got feedback, it just built up in the organization, and then things didn't really turn out very well. And so that's something that I had learned and took it back from that. And now on BSLI, I've tried to make a more active effort about that, and really try and see what the actions, what the consequences are, and what the results are when I'm acting in a certain way. So that's something with leadership, again, just when you hear about all these things, it's one of the best ways to really figure out how it happens is to just go ahead and try it out and do it. And certainly as you said earlier, you know, leaders don't know things. They'll make mistakes. But in my opinion, a sign of a good leader, and something that I think is very respectable for a great leader, is they'll realize when they've done something wrong, and they'll learn from it, and everyone will learn from it, and then think you move on responsibly.
Also, I'll add on to that. I think it's like when you have your current leadership team and they're looking for like almost replacements, they go around and scope out and see people who are passionate about the organization and passionate in what they do. And that's like a key tell sign to be like, this person, if they were asked to be a leader, they may step up to the plate, but they may shy away from it because they may think that they don't meet all the requirements for that position. Then they'll wait for that time to come. But by that time already has come, there could be somebody else ready to go. And at that point in time, they may get passed up on since they didn't take that initial jump point to it.
Yeah, you make a good point, Trevor. You said they may not meet all the requirements of the position. And I would bet $1 to a donut that in 99% of all leadership environments, no leader meets all the requirements of the position. That's the perfect human being, and none of us have all the requirements. And so this should encourage people to think carefully about what they select themselves out of. Because if you select yourself out of something because you don't have all the requirements, and nobody has all the requirements, you may have more of the requirements than anyone else, and therefore opt out. My friend and colleague, and he was my former boss as well, Dave King, he now runs a company called Dynetics. And he told me the story about how he applied to become shuttle launch director, right? He was young, really young guy, right? By all means, sort of not as, you know, grizzled veteran that you'd want in the firing room, right? Because he was still young in his career, but he applied anyway. He applied anyway. And through circumstance, he was qualified. But I think everyone would say, well, he might not have had everything you wanted in the launch director, which would be, I don't know, serving as launch director for 50 launches, and then you're pretty comfortable, right? But that's not, he didn't have that, but he applied, right? He stepped out, he tried. He said, you know, I don't even expect that I will get the job, but I will learn a lot by having gone through the process of applying for the job, so that in the future, whether it's this job or some other job, right? Well, guess what? He got it. Now, we won't go into all the reasons why, but he got it. And he did a great job. He did a great job as launch director, launching the space shuttle. Then he became, you know, leader in the center management at Kennedy Space Center. And he came to Marshall Space Flight Center, became the center director at NASA Marshall, retired out of the agency. Now he runs Dynetics, sold that company to Leidos. So he's done really well. But I remember that story that he was telling me about when he applied to his first sort of like serious, I mean, all jobs at NASA are serious, but when you're the launch director, it's really a serious gig. And he applied, and I think he was in his 30s. And, you know, he's launching people into space that have twice the NASA experience that he has. And the launch director is the one that decides when to push the red button and make it go. He's got a team around him. She has a team around her, all kinds of decision criteria, all kinds of requirements on weather and range safety and vehicle performance and ships in the ocean and all kinds of things. But he stepped out, and not because he had everything it took, but because he had enough. And if you have enough, try it.
It's great. I guess it helps us transition into the next topic is knowing when to take a leadership position. What are like the signs you're like saying there's a spot and I should go get it in that sense?
For me, it's if you think you're going after a leadership position and you're going to get it as something to acquire for yourself, you're probably not the right person for it. Now, there's a dimension to it, right? But that can't be the whole reason. You have to have some other set of reasons, some other true reason, you know. And I hear a lot of people come in, I interview people for jobs. Why do you want the job? Well, I just can't wait to serve. I'm like, okay, tell me more about that. Well, I can't wait to serve, right? I thought that was the answer you wanted me to give. It's not about me, it's about serving the other people. But if you can't go any deeper than that, I'm pretty sure that's a pretty thin veneer. You will know, and you will be torn, I think. If it's a slam dunk, then I would really think twice about it. Because when you get into the leadership position, you will be extraordinarily disappointed because it is a lot of hard work. There are no perfect answers. When you make a decision about something, that's what you're being asked to do. You disadvantage one set of stakeholders and you advantage another set of stakeholders. So you're constantly, how shall we say, disappointing people. Hopefully it's not the same people all the time with your decision making, but you're there to make a decision. And you own it. You own it. This, I don't take any responsibility. That's garbage. If you're in charge, you're in charge. You're accountable and responsible for things that you don't even have direct control over because it's done by other people. But your backside is the one that's in the sling. If you're not ready for that, don't go for it.
All right. To like almost transition into that next question is like, how do you ask for like a leadership position? Like, I understand when kids from high school come up to college and they see all the different student organizations, and then some organizations may have elections in that fall for that position. Like, how does an underclassman go up and ask like someone who's a senior member, been on the organization for 3 to 4 years, and be like, what's it like being in that position? It might be an intimidating experience since they're a lot older and experienced. They don't know what answer that they're going to get out of them.
How'd you do it, Harrison?
So I was actually thinking about this when you were making some of the comments on the last question. But one of the things that I think is that I really like about BSLI with our elections is the fact that it gives our students a sense of validation about being in that role, in the sense that, you know, like for example, when I was being elected president, I was the only candidate, but the only reason I even ran in the first place was because I had a lot of people on the team come up and say, hey, you know, no one's running for president. Like, we'd really like to have you, you know, lead the team. And that was something that I felt, you know, now you have, when you talk about accountability and responsibility, that is when every time I was sending out emails or scheduling things or leading meetings, like those are the people in my mind that, you know, I have a whole team of people depending on me, and they've asked me to lead the team. So certainly when it comes to responsibility, I think that's a huge thing. And then in terms of younger students seeking out positions, I certainly, it's a great trait of a leader, of someone who has a bit of ambition, a little bit of drive, because there's a lot and it can be overwhelming. So just having a little bit of fire within you, that is huge, because someone can't be a leader if you don't have that drive a little bit. But then at the same time, I know there's a lot of, especially on BSLI, I've talked to a lot of students who are really intimidated by positions, and even though I think that they would make a good choice, they're worried about the responsibility and the workload. So that's something that we had done a little bit on, actually when I was a freshman. One of the juniors was going through and talking to some of the younger students and trying to identify people just to get them interested, get them aware, as well as really help connect them in other ways. Like we have Ohio Aerospace Institute Day, where several representatives of the team go down to the State House and to talk about the organization. That's just a great example of a way that younger students can get involved and really learn about talking about the team and understanding at a deeper level what it is and who we are, and talk to pretty important people as well. There's been the vice governor, is that the correct term?
Lieutenant governor, yeah.
Lieutenant governor, that's right. Yeah, the lieutenant governor presides over it, and there's certainly CEOs and executives from all over the state and even beyond the state coming as well. So being able to talk about your team in that regard is certainly not only a trial run for some of the older leadership to see, is this person a good fit or not, but also just a chance for the younger person to get a chance to learn as well.
to also piggyback on, it's like a little side tangent. I think if you go to those events as a member for BSLI and talk about it, as well as on behalf of Ohio State, if you know your product, you're going to be a lot confident in yourself and you're going to be able to impress a lot of people. Because I know when I went to IAC, I went there, it's like, yeah, I don't have too much aerospace topics to talk about, but I can represent Ohio State in BSLI. And I know Dr. Horak listened to one of my conversations. He was very impressed on how I carried it, even though I didn't have a full aerospace degree or 100% taking aerospace classes, but I could hold a decent conversation. Even if I didn't know the topic, I'd flag somebody down for BSLI to help me assist and explain a part of the rocket that I couldn't really explain that I didn't work on.
Yeah, that conversation I remember very, very well, Trevor, because it was a window into, and this is a serious comment, I mean, it was a window into the fact that there's a leadership opportunity for everybody. And you wound up in a conversation with somebody. It was a pretty serious, good conversation. It wasn't just sort of like cocktail hour. And you did exactly the right things. You shared what you knew. You had passion and enthusiasm. People could tell you were totally committed in the organization. And when you got to a question you didn't know, you didn't say, well, here, let me tell you what. You said, wait, she's the expert. Let me grab, I don't know, maybe it was Joyce or something, said she runs propulsion. She can tell you about that, right? And you were able to make a connection. So even if you're a young person in an organization and you don't have what I'll call a formal leadership role, right? And that means one that's sort of on an org chart, or you need to be elected or what have you. The opportunity for leadership for you is still quite large. And if you execute that opportunity for leadership well, other people will recognize it and they will come to you and say, hey, I saw what you were doing. That was really cool, Trevor, how you had that conversation. You communicated really well. Maybe you should think about doing that officially, for BSLI. Or Harrison, we see what you're doing. Would you run for president? Right. So it's a way in which you can cultivate your leadership skills, even though you're not in a formal leadership position, and grow those into something that may, if you want, translate into a more formal leadership role as a young person just coming into an organization. Because sure, you're not going to make a freshman the president. That's not going to happen. Just you don't have enough. You might be likable enough and trustworthy enough, but you don't know enough of the subject matter to be effective. But
I think that almost comes down to like self-leadership in that aspect, and just like knowing like your boundaries and what you can and can't really do and what's possible and what's impossible at that point in time.
Yeah.
So once you know that, I think that's like a great way of knowing your capabilities for an organization.
Totally. I had to plug in my computer so it didn't die while we're in the middle of stuff. So that's what I was doing over my shoulder here. So.
All right, now we'll transition to the third topic, looking at how to reduce like leadership gap and either power struggles an organization could have. So one that could be like a common is when you have a lot of great leaders in an organization, how do you balance out like power within it? Because like you could split the organization between two dominant people and they don't want to like really budge their power. Like how do you negotiate through that?
Oh, that's a loaded question. First of all, you don't want to ever get into that situation, right? So the best way sometimes to avoid situations you don't want to be in is don't get in them. The other thing that I think is if people are truly leading an organization and they have an understanding that their job is to steward the organization, it is not to exercise their power. Said a different way, the exercise of the power that's vested in you is for a purpose. And that purpose should be the propagation of the values and the goals and the objectives of the organization in a way that keeps the ball going. Okay. Now, usually when you have two people at loggerheads, they may not want the same things. And so the first thing I think you need to try to figure out is how do we get people to want the same things? Now, they don't have to be an exact list duplicate, but in a Venn diagram sense, the circles have to overlap. I'll refer you to an experience that I'm aware of with regards to the Hubble Space Telescope. Okay, as you'll recall, Hubble was launched 30 years ago. and it was launched with a flawed mirror. The mirror was ground perfectly to a crummy specification. So they ground it perfectly to the numbers they had, but the numbers were wrong. So here we had $1 billion telescope in orbit with a bum mirror. Well, so the people that were going to use the telescope, the science mission director at NASA, and the people that built the telescope aren't necessarily in the same organization. And you can imagine what interacted with the rotating fan blades when it was figured out that there was a bad mirror, right? The science community and the engineering community were just killing each other. And they brought in a guy named Jim Odom to run the program, run the Hubble program after this was figured out, figure out what are we going to go do, right? And I think there was some very heated meetings between the science leadership at NASA and Jim Odom. Like, we're going to make you pay. You messed up our telescope. This is a huge, right? And it was a serious issue. This is front page of the Washington Post. This is, a whole shuttle mission. This is the dream of a lifetime to have a telescope in orbit, and NASA didn't build it right. And what Jim Odom said was, no, that's not going to happen. We're not going to get at loggerheads because you and I want the same thing. And I'll refer you to a book by a gentleman named Charlie Pellerin. The book is called How NASA Builds Teams. It's an amazing story about project management, and what, in this case, when you had two centers of power within the agency arguing over something as huge as you screwed up the Hubble Space Telescope and it's now in orbit and we just found out, right? How Jim Odom in particular and others worked through that situation. And Charlie Pellerin was the lead. You go look at his LinkedIn profile. It says, I managed and led the team that designed, built, and launched the Hubble Space Telescope into space with a flawed mirror. That's what it says on his profile. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And the leadership lessons in that storyline are profound, because as we all know, right, how many people remember that Hubble was launched with a flawed mirror? I mean, I do, but we just, it's like a time machine. It's the most amazing thing humans have ever built. But the management and leadership struggles in that program were enormous because the consequences were so high. Go take a look at that book. That'll give you some insight into how to handle what I'll call a power struggle and how to handle it constructively.
Harrison, would you like to add anything else to that?
Oh, I just say I can confirm it's pretty impressive when you say on your LinkedIn profile, I just looked it up here, that he led the team that launched the Hubble telescope, a flawed Hubble telescope. Oh, and by the way, I led $750 million per year in revenue and billions of dollars in support services. That's pretty impressive that he had that. But it looks like he's gone on. I mean, I'm gonna read over that book. I'm gonna order it on Amazon to read over. It sounds like a great read.
Yeah, it's an excellent read. He talks a lot about a program I worked on as well called the Gamma Ray Observatory, and we had our issues begin early on, and at the end of the day, that program came together, and it's one of the most amazing, successful missions you've never heard of. But sister ship to Hubble. There were 4 great observatories. Sorry to digress, but the idea was you can't really build a telescope to see everything from infrared all the way to gamma rays. You just can't do it. So the idea was you would build these 4 different spacecraft, each to observe a different window of the electromagnetic spectrum, and you'd have them all in orbit at the same time. And so you have Space Infrared Telescope Facility, CERTIF, and then you had moving up in energy, you had a Hubble Space Telescope in the UV, from the infrared up into the UV. You had the Chandra X-ray Observatory, and then you had the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory as well. CERTIF wound up being called Spitzer, by the way. So that, in that sense, Chandra, GRO, Compton, and Spitzer are sister ships to the Hubble. Chandra's still operating, Hubble's still operating. GRO was put back in the ocean after some of the gyros failed, but it flew for 10 years.
Trevor, that sounds like a good podcast episode of the future. 5 best NASA missions you've never heard of.
I can always bring Dr. Horg back on. We can knock that out with a couple new members. Love
Be great.
to cycle through it.
Sure.
I did want to add, Trevor, really
go.
quick. We're talking about when struggles do happen on an organization. I think, again, we talked a little bit so far about learning, and I think that, to give a little context, that's happened on BSLI before. When I was starting out, I think the project managers had a lot more their level of responsibilities and powers associated with that was a lot wider than it is now, and it was focused a lot more than just on building the rockets. So the way our administrative team has changed over the years has really been to take away some of the responsibilities that are more on the administrative side, like a lot of the purchasing and scheduling meetings and administrative marketing work of the team, and really focusing on letting our project managers do the technical work whilst they can still be involved with it. And I think one of the biggest things that has helped is to get more people involved in that vision of the mission. Like, for example, we put in purchase orders. It goes through a lot of hands on our organization, but the good that comes out of that is that there's multiple steps along the way. We're validating, is this money that is being spent on our team going towards our team's mission, or is it not? And I think there's a lot of younger members who have come into our leadership who have expressed frustration about that. But when you look in terms of in that process, you realize that there is that intent behind it to make sure that things are in line with the vision, even if that means it's going to take a couple more days to get your parts in.
Right.
That's great. To also build off of that, like, it transitions almost to my next question is, like, how do you do leadership training and, like, making sure people understand why you do those processes? And if they, question them, like some of them, it's like, is it like something to relook at as the administrative team to be like, is it something that we need to redo for the times that we're currently in the organization? It's not like how it was, like, 3 or 4 years ago, and looking at that sense. So, like, how do you, train up the new members to become future leaders in that organization?
Well, from my perspective, I think that it's important that leadership not only shares what is known, here's how we do this, but also how we know what is known. In other words, some of the lessons learned, that we do it this way because, and here's how we figured out the best way to attach the fins. And here's what we learned about the importance of the parachute system, because if it doesn't open, then we wound up having to dig the thing out of the ground and all, So it's important to share what we know about what we do and everything we know about what we do. But it's also important to share how we know what we know, what had to be done in order to secure that learning. And sometimes it's just hard to do that. You just want to say, well, look, we know this, do it, right? I don't have time to explain it. You got to slow down and take the time not only to share what do you know, but how you know what you know, because that creates a more fulsome understanding in the mind and knowledge base of those around you. And then they can extrapolate as well and say, oh, well, that must mean that if we tried that, this would happen, right? So those are the two things that I think lead at least partly in that direction.
Harrison, would you like to add to that?
No, I think Dr. Horak said everything pretty well.
I will add a little bit to it. Like, when you go into training, I think it's a great idea to at least have the younger members shadow the position that they would like to try out, so they can see how much time they have to put into it, how much pressure that they, or stress that they may be under during that time. It's like, oh, I would like to be project manager. And, like, they do the project manager presentation that they don't get it. So, like, for BSLI, they are probably a good possible candidate for being a DPM, understanding all the technical aspects and just seeing what's it like to be a project manager close to it, but you don't have that 100% responsibility to decide, yes, we're going to launch on this test launch day because the weather's great and all this stuff. Or it's like, let's hold off and let's not rush this thing and put members through crazy hours and do all-nighters to get this thing done for the test launch. Right. And that can be the same done for the PDR and CDR on this organization. You just got to look at what you have to do. And, like, if you really want to be a certain position, like a structures lead, understand the processes that go into it. And I think mentorship is, like, a great aspect to understand that, or just not even the term mentorship, just shadow them for a day to see what they do. Like, who do they email, how do they contact with businesses, and just stuff like that. If you can see that, I think that would be good steps in the right direction for all the younger members to try out.
Right. Agreed.
Well, to bring us to a close almost, after you do so much great stuff as a leader and impress a lot of people, it's time to think about stepping down and transitioning of power. So the first one is, how do you make a smooth transition from you stepping down and letting a new person fill in your shoes?
Harrison?
Yeah, since we're going through that right now on BSLI, we talked a little bit earlier about systems and being able to explain things. So one of my big pieces this year as president has been trying to make sure that our administrative team and our leadership team has been documenting what they've been doing. And I've formalized it into your position manual, which is, it's pretty standard among student organizations. So I figured it was time for BSLI to do it as well. And the whole goal of this manual was to be not only a log of, in September, you should be focusing on these things because it's the beginning of the year, and there's these deadlines, you need to make sure you hit all of those. And then later on in the year, there's some other deadlines and some other events you need to make sure. So there's a nice chronology in there of a different expectation of events. And then as well as some other those important processes that we talked about earlier, making sure that knowledge is transferred. And then finally, the last bit when it comes to the manuals is the old chair and the new chair coming together and sitting down to talk about it and go over it. And so at our last administrative meeting, I let everyone know, started to get them to make sure that they're going to be having those conversations as well. But this is a good reminder to me as well. I'm going to start following up with the rest of the leadership team, making sure those conversations has happened. And certainly we have a few positions that I have been trying to shift the responsibility from the president role to those chair roles, specifically on our business development team and our alumni engagement roles. So a lot of the work I've been doing on that, I've been trying to make sure that as much of that knowledge has been transferred across as possible. And one other thing that isn't an issue probably in the real world, because people leave and people move in and it's very official. But in the student org, I think it's very important to have a set date to say, this is when one person's job is done and this is when the next person's job is starting. Had we all been on campus this year, I was really hoping for a nice ceremony at the end of the year where we could recognize everyone. But we've had to do that online instead. And then also I was hoping that we could have given all of our new leadership team our new polos, and then we could get all official headshots done together. But that sounds like something Joe will have to work on in the fall.
Yeah, this polo works just fine. Right? One leader at a time. One leader at a time. And that's why it's very important what you described, Harrison. One leader at a time. I would leave when the party's going well. If you're a leader and things are going well, then that's when you might think about handing over to somebody else. Because you've accomplished what you've set out to accomplish. And you're giving the next person a sound platform to build on. Rather than waiting for it to go like this, you bail out and they have to figure out how to do this, right? That's really hard to give to somebody. And so sharing procedures and sitting down and making sure that transition is a continuously differentiable function across your leadership boundary, critical. And if you are both sets of leaders or both leaders are mindful that their goal is to steward the organization, not to wield power, then that gets much easier to do. But if it's I'm in charge and my role here is to wield power and make decisions and tell people what to do, then you're going to have a broke.
And I'm thinking, like, when you have those transition, it is nice to, when things are going well, it's a nice smooth transition. And like, the next leader, you can, maintain that and prolong the golden era of that organization, or the height of all the great stuff that's happening, and continue to press forward. And that's what a leader kind of needs to do in most aspects. And if they, even if it's like you're getting close to the climax, and you can, if you stepped away and moved yourself out of the equation, the organization can still be fine. I think you can also step down in that sense, just based on how many years of experience, like your age, as well as like I think someone needs to have like a new spin on it. I've been in like the industry for X amount of years, and I think I'm ready,
Right.
to settle down and be done and watch new people come up with some great stuff.
Yeah, I think it's my grandmother, this saying, I attribute it to her anyway. Maybe I got it from somewhere else, but she said the cemetery is full of irreplaceable people. And your time as a leader is bound to be finite, one way or the other, right? And no one at the end of the day is irreplaceable. So you shouldn't think that you are. And so when your leadership term comes to an end, gracefully hand it over to somebody else and go do something different, right? Don't constantly, it's, I don't know, the captain of the high school soccer team that keeps coming back after 6 years away to tell you how a soccer team should be run. It's like, please, get on with your life. That was 6 years ago. We've moved on. We're a different organization. Uncle Rico, I'm sure, if you ever saw Napoleon Dynamite, you can throw the football over those mountains. Great. That's so annoying. Go lead something else, but don't tie yourself to that leadership position beyond your time. You don't help anybody. Least of all, you don't help yourself.
That's perfect. I guess we can start to wrap up this podcast. Is there any final thoughts that we would like to hit and, let people, these are the things you should, hone in on if you're thinking about leadership?
Harrison?
No, you made some good points at the end. I think really to sum it up, when you're talking earlier about what makes a good leader versus a bad leader, I think it comes down to that definition of, are you a steward or are you there to wield power? And I think a lot of people are ambitious, certainly tend to fall more on the power wielding side. And I think people who are more asked in their role tend to be more on the steward side. And certainly that's not exclusive, but if you're thinking about being a leader, or you've been asked to be a leader, or you are a leader, I think just doing some self-reflection about why you're there, what's your purpose, and where you're trying to go, and just getting to know yourself is always a great thing to do, no matter where you're at.
Yeah, I guess I'll finish, guys, with my current thought that so much of leadership is context work and not content work. And we touched on this earlier at the very beginning about, setting the culture and setting the tone and being the example. Your organization's culture, you'll hear this in the Battelle Center as well, is the worst behavior that your leader will tolerate or engage in with respect to the organization. So you are it, right? You are setting the context. And in some contexts, work goes really well. And in other contexts, the same job goes terribly. And so that doesn't say anything about the skill of the people or the difficulty of the job. That talks about the context. And you as the leader are, apportioning social capital, you're apportioning financial capital, time, decision-making to create an environment. And in that environment, the people around you on the team then also can excel. So really think about the context work that you're being asked to do as a leader, and not so much about the content work of what you do, because ideally, your structures person should be doing the structures analysis, and your parachute person should be doing the parachute. Your propulsion lead should be doing the propulsion, and your comm lead should be doing the radio and the computer and the payload. That's not you. If you're the leader, you're providing the context and the environment in which all of those people can do their very best. And that's what you should focus on.
And I'll try to wrap us on up. One final thing that a leader should try to do is try to remove obstacles out of their team members' way and give them those chances to be successful, and try to mitigate and reduce risk that could potentially hurt that team member or the project that they're working on. Just be able to, reduce that. It's almost like project managing to an extent, but, safety is always important as a leader, and making sure everyone's well-being, mental health and physical health are up to par, or at least decent enough to get through the day. And if they can't do it, you pull them aside, talk to them, and just trying to understand what can be done to make sure things are okay with them. So when they come back and forth each and every day, they're able to contribute the best that they can for that point in time.
Exactly so.
Well, Thank you, Dr. Horak and Harrison, for coming on to this episode 6 for the podcast. I also want to thank all the Rocketeers that listen to us each day, also those on Slack, even those that come from different universities. It's a pleasure for you guys listening to us. I also want to thank our sponsors that also sponsor BSLI. It's great that you guys invest so much time and resources into us. We thank you and appreciate you all. And I also want to thank the alumni that also tune in and are our backbone for this organization and keep coming back to provide insight on industry and just saying what their experience is like on BSLI throughout the years. And lastly, go Bucks.
Go Bucks. Be safe.